Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. We're going to begin today by hearing further evidence from Mr. Stephen Howard, formerly of the BRE. So I'm just going to check that Mr. Howard can see me and hear me satisfactorily. Good morning, Mr. Howard.
Good morning, I can see and hear you.
Thank you very much indeed. We better just do the housekeeping before we go any further. Can you please confirm that you are alone in the room from which you're giving evidence?
I'm alone in the room.
Yes, thank you. That you have no documents or other materials with you?
I have no documents or other materials.
Thank you. And that your mobile phone is in another room and that you don't have any other electronic device with you which is capable of receiving messages?
That's correct.
Good. Thank you very much. Well, now, as usual, I'm here with my fellow panel members, Ms. Istefan and Mr. Akbor.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
And I think that we're pretty well ready to begin. The procedure, Mr. Howard, will be the same as it was yesterday. Again, your legal representatives are following the hearing. We'll have a break during the morning as we have in the past. Is there anything that you would like to raise or ask me before we begin?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Good, thank you very much. Well, in that case, Mr. Millett, perhaps you'd like to ask some questions.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the panel, and good morning, Mr. Howard.
Good morning.
Now we're going to turn to look at the BS 8414 Part 2 tests that Celotex carried out on their RS 5000 insulation product in the first half of 2014. Now, the first test was carried out in February 2014. But before we look at that, I just want to ask you about your involvement with Celotex before February 2014. Can we look at CEL 50708, please, first? And if we go to page 3 of that, we can see that this sits in an email chain which we looked at, I think, on Thursday, in the context of the concerns that he had raised about Kingspan. But this is now about details of the system that he wants to test. And if you look at the email on the bottom of the screen, you'll see it starts, and this is the one sent at 0917, 18th of October 2013. Stephen, once we have agreed the final design, which I'm hoping will be soon, I will get back to you with confirmation. One of the key considerations for us with testing to BR135 is that it enables us not to limit ourselves to one particular application stroke build-up. Is there anything the BRE can offer that could extend the use of our product in other systems similar to the tested rig? The main one for us is that whilst we will be testing a particular rain screen cladding panel, we do not want this to limit ourselves to that one particular panel. You reply a little bit further up, but if you go up the screen, please, to the email above it at the top, you can see that you reply on the 21st of October at 11:41. Thanks for the email. We would need to see further details of the systems in question to answer the question fully. From the information below, I do not think we would be able to issue an assessment report on the terracotta systems based on the testing of an ACM panel. However, without a full explanation of the differences between the systems, we are a bit in the dark. In terms of the claims in the market, would it be possible for you to forward an example? Were you alluding there to the possibility of a desktop assessment when you refer to an assessment report on a terracotta system?
Yes.
If we go to CEL 401883 then next, please, we can see that the discussion progresses into the autumn of 2013. This is a further email from Jonathan Roper to you on the 8th of November 2013. And it starts, Steve, as discussed earlier, please find below a list of requirements that ideally we would like to get out of the test report. I understand that all of these will not be possible, but broadening the scope as much as possible is critical to us. And then he sets out three criteria which he wants to have in the test. Did you give any advice to Celotex in relation to how to broaden the scope of the application of any BS 8414 test?
I think the only correspondence was to explain the process, i.e. we would need to test and then do an assessment, or the way the market was working at the time was to do an assessment to follow. But I don't believe we ever got to the point where we were testing, where we defined what a worst case scenario was.
Do you know why Mr. Roper thought that it was possible, given that BS 8414 is a system test and not a product test?
Because that was the way the market was working. You would take a test report and then there would be a desktop assessment to review changes from the test report. And that was in an email from me to him, I believe.
Yes. And that was so, was it, in the latter part of 2030? That was that was the situation at that stage, was it?
That was the situation at that stage.
Can I then go to CEL 401888, please, with you? He said, well, this is an email from you back to Jonathan Roper on the 13th of November 2013. And you say, I've spoken directly with Phil and he will make contact. This is what you'll be faced with. A steel frame with a simulated floor slab, more photos to follow. If you need higher quality, let me know. Was this email your response to Jonathan Roper's email of the 8th of November?
Well, I can't actually recall that, but if it's in a chain, yes, it probably will. It probably will be.
Right. And it doesn't appear to be in a chain. It seems to be a separate document. Do you know why you told him that Phil Clark would be in contact rather than answering his questions yourself?
Because Phil was responsible for the interaction with the contractor and the client to get the systems onto the test frames.
Right.
So, I was going to say Phil would be managing from that point on the client interaction.
I see. Can we then go to the first test itself? And you deal with this in your witness statement at page 31. Can we please go to page 31 and look together at paragraph 137? And this is in response to the question above it. You just see the question. Question 6C, which BRE employees dealt with the test sponsor at each stage? This is to include brokering, quotes, and other preliminary correspondence, planning, installation, the test itself, and the preparation of the report. What was your own involvement at each or any of these stages? What was the extent of Phil Clark and or Tony Baker's involvement at each or any stage? And you say at paragraph 137, I dealt with the initial inquiry stage. Tony Baker initially acted as project manager and provided the initial quotation to Celotex as I've set out above, but I believe he subsequently changed roles to fire resistance manager. It appears that his direct involvement in the project ended in or around November 2013. Now, you say that you dealt with the initial inquiry stage in relation to the first test. Was that the limit of your involvement in the first test?
I believe so, yes. I didn't get directly involved.
If we go on to page 33, 2 pages on, please, in your statement, and let's look at paragraph 149. You say, question, which individuals from Celotex attended the test on the 14th of February 2014. You say email correspondence indicates that the following people were scheduled to attend the test on 14th February 2014. Jonathan Roper, Jamie Hayes, Rob Warren, and David Cooper. And then at 149, were you present during the test? I do not believe I attended the test, but I cannot be completely sure of this. An Outlook meeting request suggests that the following BRE staff were present: Phil Clark, Tom Lennon, Lee Ament, and Simon Barrow. Since you wrote your report, have you had any further recollections about whether you did in fact attend the test or not?
No, I don't believe I attended that test.
Now, at the time of that first test in February 2014, you were the business group manager. Had you given that it was February 2014, do you think you'd become as fully involved with cladding as you say in your statement you did become in 2014?
Not at that stage. That was in the process of cladding, moving away from Tony Baker to myself.
Did you think, well, do you recall whether you yourself had oversight of that test programme at that point?
It would have sat with it, well, I can't recall exact dates, but it would have sat within the responsibility of the department that I was business group manager for.
Right. Let's just see if we can be a little bit more precise. Could we go to page 22 of your statement, please? And let's look at paragraph 98. The question here, question 5E, as far as you were aware, who at the BRE had oversight of BS 8414 testing in 2014? Who had overall sight of this test? This is the February 2014 test. You say at paragraph 98, I was the business group manager at the time, so I would have had oversight of the test programme. Phil Clark had oversight of this specific test. Working for Stephen Manchester, Dr. Debbie Smith was director for the fire testing area. So you had oversight of Phil Clark had oversight of this specific test. Does that mean that you didn't have oversight of this specific test?
I didn't attend the test, no.
You told us that, that's understood, but did you have oversight of it even though you didn't attend?
Well, Phil Clark had oversight of the specific test, i.e. the project management from construction onto the system. I had very little involvement in this test.
Right.
Directly.
Directly, I understand that. Did you, well, let me ask it this way. Did Phil Clark report to you directly in relation to this test as a matter of the hierarchy at the BRE?
Phil Clark was reporting into Stephen Manchester, but he would have spoken to me regarding that test. So
you were indirectly
yes,
supervising it?
Yes.
Can we go to BRE 405808, please? BRE 405808. This is an email from Phil Clark to you on the 19th of February 2014, so 4 days after the test. And you can see that there's an attachment. And he says, Steve, attached is the data for the Celotex test for you to look at. I have also included a still of the system at the time the crib was extinguished, with the complete panel superimposed to show where the flames are in comparison to the panels and panel joints. I'm happy to come to you to discuss if you have any questions. Phil. There's an attachment to this, which was the full test data and some photographs. I'll give the references, but I don't think we need to go to them unless you want to look at them. BRE 405809, which is the test data, and BRE 405810, which is the photographs. Do you know why Mr. Clark was sending you this data to look at?
It wasn't unusual, and it's not unusual to send data around for the largest tests for review of what's actually gone on.
Did you consider that data?
I would have imagined I would have looked at the graphs, which is considering the data, but
right,
not much more, I don't believe.
You say it's not unusual to send data around to the largest tests for a review of what's going on. What precisely was it that Phil Clark wanted you to look at in the data he was sending you?
I think it was probably forwarded on to me for information. They'd run, the cladding test is a large-scale test. It was the first test with a new client. I'm pretty sure I'd have been aware of a failure, and he was then just showing basically what the temperature temperature measurements of that test were on the day.
Right. So you would have examined, at least in some detail, as you've described, the data that he sent you.
Yeah, I think I would have reviewed the data.
For what purpose would you have reviewed the data?
Possibly out of interest, really. I mean, cladding's a large-scale test. It was to glean data and information from what had actually gone on. So, as I said, for the larger scale tests, if you're interested in temperature profiles, you're interested in maximum temperatures, you're interested in what goes on with the testing.
It sounds, and please correct me if I'm wrong about this from your last answer, that because cladding was a large-scale test, there was something perhaps less usual about it so far as your work is concerned, or perhaps something more interesting about it. Is that fair?
It was probably the largest standard test that BRE ran. But it wasn't unusual to send around data from other tests. You wouldn't send it around for all tests, but 1181, which is the sandwich panel test, was often circulated for information to those involved.
Now, Mr. Clark says at the end of the email, which I'm afraid has disappeared from your screen, but I'll tell you what it says. He says, "I'm happy to come to you to discuss if you have any questions." Did he actually come to discuss the data with you?
I don't recall a discussion about that test, no.
You don't recall it, but do you recall whether you had any questions arising out of the data he sent you?
I don't recall, no, not on that specific test.
Let's go to CEL 50842, please. This is an email from Jonathan Roper to Dr. Parina Patel and David Cooper, both of IFC, International Fire Consultants, dated the 17th of February 2014. Subject, Celotex BR135 preliminary thermocouple data. It says, Parina, David, please find attached preliminary data of our test on Friday. I've spoken to Phil this morning and he sees no reason why a classification report cannot be issued, as it is in his opinion that extending the test to the full duration of 30 minutes rather than stopping at 25 mins would have made little difference. And as shown attached, we meet the performance criteria of BR135 in not exceeding 600 degrees within the first 15 mins. Depending on how Phil's peers at the BRE receive this, it may be useful if we could set aside a date in the diary in which you could dial in to discuss your view from the test. First, was this the reason why Mr. Clark was sending you the test data, namely to see if you agreed whether a BR135 report could in fact be issued?
No, because the BR135 test or the BS8414 test needs to run for an hour. If you've had to put a sample out at 25 minutes, then you could not classify that to BR135.
Well, that's a reason why he might not have done. I understand that. But does this prompt your recollection whether you had a discussion with Mr. Clark about whether you could classify this data to BR135?
No.
Let's look then at the retesting of Celotex RS 5000. Can we go please next to CEL 50862? Now, this is an email from Mr. Roper to you, Jonathan Roper to you on the 14th of March, 2014. And it responds to you. That's on the screen. Can we just scroll down, please, to the bottom of page 1 and look at yours to him on that day, 10 o'clock. We'll come to the response shortly. You say to him, Jonathan, I understand you've been talking with Phil Clark regarding the freeing up of one of the existing blockwork walls. The estimated cost for removing the wall and returning this rig to a Part 2 configuration will be £2,500. This will reduce the timescales for testing. If you want to proceed, let me know, and I will issue a formal quotation. At that stage, had you formed the impression that Celotex were keen to reduce the timescales?
Yes, they wanted to retest as quickly, yes.
Had you had a discussion with Celotex before that about that subject?
I don't recall one, no.
When you say, I understand you've been talking with Phil Clark, had Phil Clark talked to you about this topic, which then prompted you to send this email to Jonathan Roper?
Yes, probably, yes, it's more likely that Jonathan Roper has asked when the next slot in the test booking was possible, and Phil said then, but we can remove the blockworks from one of the other rigs to bring this date forward.
Right. And then if you go to the response at the top of the page, he comes back to you and says the same day, 2 minutes later, in fact, looking at the timestamp of 10:02, Steve, correct, we're keen to retest as soon as possible, and therefore we are more than happy to pay to free up one of the existing blockwork walls. Was it clear to you from that, not just the speed of Mr. Roper's response, but what he says in the text of this email, that Celotex were in something of a hurry to retest?
Yes, they were in a hurry to retest, but a lot of people are keen to get into fire testing labs and test. This was nothing particularly unusual across the fire testing labs.
And they were happy to pay the 2,500, as we can see.
Yes.
Now, you were still business manager at the time of the second test. That's early May 2014, weren't you?
Yes.
So does it follow that you still had oversight of the test program?
I did, yes.
Was that oversight in the same way as you did in respect of the February test, or had you become closer to the testing at the BRE at that time?
I was becoming closer to the testing, yes.
In what way were you becoming closer, which differentiated your role in February 2014 from the role as you had it in May 2014?
Things like more client communication, more looking at dealing with things like quotations, looking at the resourcing available, looking at other staff, things of that nature. I just generally become closer to the operational throughput of the test.
Right. Did you become more closely involved in the specifics of tests, the data produced, the results of the tests?
I've become more involved, not in the data produced, but the data reviews and things like that of the tests.
Now, you say in your statement at paragraph 68 that you attended the second test on the 2nd of May 2014. So, I mean, unless you've had a...
No, I'm pretty sure.
Thank you. Let's go to BRE 3030681. This is a collection of photographs, which is labelled at the bottom 295369, page 1 of 2. Do you know whose handwriting that is?
I believe that's Phil Clark's.
This is the report number 295369 for the May 2014 Celotex test. Can we look at the top left-hand picture and just have that one blown up, please? That's a close-up of an edge. And can you see a white board behind the orange or ruby coloured cladding panel, which is not present behind the grey or white panel immediately below it?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Roper told us that that is a when I say that, I mean the board behind the ruby outer board, is a 6mm magnesium oxide board that was installed at the level 2 thermocouples and at the top of the rig. That was his evidence. Were you aware of the inclusion of the magnesium oxide board in those locations at the time of the test?
No.
When did you first become aware of its inclusion?
I understand that there was communication between Celotex and BRE after the Grenfell fire, when BRE were notified of this issue with this test report.
Notified by whom?
I think the communication was from Celotex, but the communication comes from Celotex into BRE.
Right. Now, in his evidence to the inquiry last week, Mr. Clark told us that he was off-site on a first aid course on the 29th and 30th of April 2014. And as we know, the test took place on the 2nd of May 2014. And his evidence was also that it would be common practice that the rig would be handed over by the contractors who built the rig to the BRE a clear day before the test on the 2nd. So he calculated that that would be on the Wednesday, the 30th of April. Do you agree with that?
Procedurally, yes. I can't confirm the dates without specifics, but procedurally that sounds correct.
And he says that based on that, he thought in his evidence that it was likely that the insulation and the cladding layers were installed during the very 2 days he was out of the office. Does that accord with your experience of timescales for installation of rigs such as these?
It's possible. I haven't got detailed knowledge of, I haven't got detailed knowledge of how they would install the systems and whether those sort of panels would have been installed in those couple of days.
He also told us that during his absence, he would have arranged for someone to deputise for him and take over the supervision and the carrying out of checks on the installation. Is he correct about that?
Yes, there was other people down. There was always someone on site within the burn hall for health and safety cover and contractor supervision. What handover there was, I don't know.
You say there was always someone on site within the burn hall for health and safety cover and contractor supervision. Does that tell us that at all times during the construction of the rig by the contractor, someone from the BRE was supervising that exercise?
They would supervise the contractors, but we wouldn't spend there wouldn't be 100% inspect. We wouldn't be there all the time during the construction process. We cannot guarantee.
Because you just said that at all times during the construction of the rig by the contractor, someone from the BRE, you said there's always someone on site for contractor supervision. That's what you just told us.
But from a health and safety point of view, to make sure that they're not infringing their risk assessments or doing other things that they shouldn't be doing down in the halls. But there's a lot going on in the burn hall, so you wouldn't have 100% supervision of all the contractors installing stuff all the time.
I'm sorry to press you just a little. I just want to understand a bit more precisely what you mean. You said there's always someone on site within the burn hall for health and safety cover and contractor supervision. By that, do you mean that there was always somebody in the burn hall for one or other of those tasks?
No, what I mean by contractor supervision is to make sure that they're using mechanical equipment correctly if they brought it with them, that they are following their risk assessment, that they are wearing their hard hats, they're wearing gloves and things of that nature. They're not doing things in the burn hall that will compromise health and safety. That was the health and safety, that was the contractor supervision.
Yes, I follow. And that would be continuous, would it? In other words, there wouldn't be gaps in the contractor health and safety supervision.
There should be some, well, I cannot guarantee there was never gaps, but there should be someone on hand most of the time in that area, specifically covering those areas. You shouldn't leave contractors unsupervised.
No. And who was it, do you know, who had that responsibility for that supervision during the construction of Celatex's rig on the 29th and 30th of April 2014?
I can't remember exactly who was responsible at that time. Phil Clark would have had a part to play on that. I can't remember whether Richard Larman was Burnhall manager at the time. It depends on dates.
Now, Phil Clark went on a course on the 29th and 30th of April. Would somebody have taken his place as project engineer or officer in charge of the test?
Only if specifically asked, and only if to do so, and there was a reason over and above having a contractor management in place to do so.
And did he ask?
I don't recall seeing a request either via email or verbal.
He said that he would have arranged for someone to deputise for him. Did he?
I don't know the answer to that.
He identified you as one of the individuals he might have asked to do that. That was for the transcript, day 95, page 185, lines 10 to the end, and page 186, lines 1 to 12. Do you remember whether you were the person he asked to deputise in his 2-day absence?
I don't recall. I don't believe it was.
Are there records that the BRE kept at the time of exactly when the rig is built? Something like a Burnhall diary showing who is present?
No, I don't believe there is. Sorry, there'd be a contractor sign-in sheet on a daily basis, but I don't believe you'd sign in, you wouldn't sign staff in.
What would be the BRE's ordinary practice where the person overseeing a particular test was off-site for a day or a number of days during the construction of the test rig?
Well, as I said, normal practice at that time would be to ensure that health and safety cover and contractor supervision was in, depending on the absence and depending on where you were in the build stage. Others would be asked to take records, but it depends where you are in the build stage to do that.
Were there at the time any records of where contractors had got to in the build stage at the time Mr. Clark went off on his 2-day course?
Well, the information will be available from dates on photographs and dates on notes.
Well, why does it depend on where you are in the build stage?
Because it might have been a stage where they had finished, or at a very early stage where they were just setting out, or materials coming in, and that sort of activity. We wouldn't have staff covering the build of the rig 100% of the time. Some of the builds are 2 weeks.
You say the information would be available from dates on photographs and dates on notes. Did the BRE keep photographs with dates on them, such as electronic photograph files?
Well, any photographs that were taken would be date stamped.
Right. Now, if Mr. Clark is right that he asked or would have asked somebody to deputise for him during his 2-day absence. Would there have been, or was there a process for some kind of handover?
Not a formal process. It would have been more of an informal process.
What would that informal process involve?
Just a local arrangement with someone else to make sure that notes were taken and photographs were taken at those stages of the build. We didn't have a formal handover process.
Did you ever speak to anybody who had taken over from Mr. Clark during that 2-day period?
I don't recall.
About the construction of the rig? Sorry,
I don't recall. Sorry.
Did you speak to anybody who had taken over from Mr. Clark during that 2-day period about the construction of the rig?
I don't recall doing so.
Can we go to BRE 405773, please, at page 3? This is the statement of practice. And if you go to page 1, you can see what the document is. No, you can't. I'm sorry. So page 3 is where it starts, in fact. And this is the cladding test data file and report preparation sheet, otherwise known as the SAP, I believe. If you go down a little bit further, you can see what is to be done before the test itself. And the 5th item down is undertaking component check and obtain samples. You see that?
Yes.
Was it the BRE's invariable practice, I say invariable, was it its practice to follow the steps in this statement of practice?
Well, I think that was still under development at the time. So in terms of a broad brush, then that is the practice that we should have been following. But what exactly happened on this one, I can't say in detail, but generally speaking, that is a good reflection of what should be done for most tests.
Yes. And therefore, do you agree that it would be a good reflection of most tests that a component check and sample should be taken?
We wouldn't take samples for test systems throughout because we wouldn't do additional tests. If samples were going to be taken, that would be if we were doing third-party approvals or LPCB work.
What about undertaking the component check?
That should be done.
Yes. And what about the construction survey and photographs, each major layer, which is the next down? That should be done, yes. Yeah. Yes, that should be done. Did that happen on this occasion?
Well, from the photographs that are available, the photographs are taken and there's layers that you can see in the system. So to some extent, the records are there as to what was tested.
Yes, and did you yourself notice that in 2 places on the rig, as shown by the photographs I've shown you and further photographs we'll come to, that 8mm Marley Eternit board was being used as well as 12mm Marley Eternit board?
No.
Can you explain why not?
Because I wasn't directly involved in the test. So in terms of reference, wasn't there actually surveying the rig. So I wasn't directly involved in taking notes or photographs of the system.
Going back to we may still have it up on the system, the statement of practice, do you agree that it would have been normal come May 2014, I think you do, that there would be a construction survey and photographs of each major layer?
Yes, there should be.
Can you account for why that there isn't in your records a construction survey and a set of photographs of each major layer of the rig under construction?
But I thought we had photographs of the layers. I can't comment on why the construction layers notes were missing, but I thought we had photographs of all the layers.
Well, can you explain why there is no set of photographs of the magnesium oxide layer being installed at 2 levels on this rig?
No, I can't.
Did you yourself notice the fact when you attended the test that the Celotex rig had 2 bands of pink outer panels running around it, one at the level 2 thermocouples and one at the top of the rig?
Yes, if I attended the test, I think it'd be obvious that there was 2 different colour bands here.
Did you ask anyone from Celotex what those 2 different coloured bands were?
No, I don't recall asking the question.
Why is that?
Because you often see various configurations of test samples, various decorative layers. It didn't appear to be anything of particular note at the time.
Did you record it? Did you record the use of the 2 layers of Ruby board anywhere?
No, because I understand my involvement on the day. The test was being delivered by others who were project managing. My involvement on the day, I recall, was a safety officer. So the construction notes of the rig would have been sitting with Phil Clark on the day or over that period.
We've seen no record of the installation itself, which shows the installation of these 2 layers or levels of Ruby panels. Can you explain why that is?
No, I can't. But there are photographs that were taken which shows the 2 layers. It may have been, those outer layers may have been installed in a short period of time.
Can we go to CEL 50964, please? This is an email in June 2014, after the test. And it appears you had a telephone conversation on that day with Mr. Roper, and then he follows this up with an email. If you look at this email, this is an email from Jonathan Roper to you on the 12th of June, copy to Phil Clark. Steve, as discussed, could you please arrange a holding letter for confirmation that we've successfully tested to BS 8414 Part 2, 2005, and meet the criteria set out in BR 135 whilst we wait for the official report to be issued? Could you also please arrange that our current Class 0 test concerning our FR 5000 product could be renamed and reissued, with Celotex RS 5000 as the product code? As explained, these are identical products, but we are simply recoding the product to launch for range screen applications. Our FR 5000 test report was issued in November 2011 and has a reference of 275720. And just pausing there, was it common practice for the BRE to be asked for confirmatory holding letters such as this?
Yes.
Was it common for them to be issued?
Yes.
Did Mr. Roper tell you in your discussion why he wanted such a letter?
No, as I said, it's common for those test sponsors or those testing products to request letters of comfort whilst we write the test reports.
Do you remember what you discussed with Mr. Roper during that conversation?
No, I don't recall the conversation.
Can we go on then to CEL 50969? And then we see again, there was a further conversation, it seems, on or around the 16th of June. This is an email from Jonathan Roper to you of that date. And he says, as discussed, could you please send us a holding letter to confirm we've successfully tested to BR135, BS8414 Part 2, 2005, ASAP. System comprised a rain screen cladding system fixed to and supported by a structural steel frame. And he sets out the ingredients of it below, or components of it below. And we'll see them. Fiber cement cladding panel, proprietary vertical railing system, ventilated cavity, 100mm Celotex RS 5000, non-combustible sheathing board, Metsec frame, 2 layers of plasterboard. Do you remember the discussion that you had with him on or around the 16th of June?
I don't recall, no.
It seems from this that he asked you for a holding letter to confirm that the test had successfully passed the BR135 criteria. Do you remember that discussion?
I remember the emails. I don't remember having a specific discussion. So I do remember the emails and the holding letter.
Right. Did you notice when looking at this email that there was no reference in there to the ruby-coloured or pink-coloured bands of outer rain screen material?
Did I notice? No, because it's basically a letter of comfort or a confirmation. So it's just really as I said, it's a letter of comfort. It's not a test report.
Can we go to CEL 402001, please? And this is your letter to Jonathan Roper. And it says, it's dated the 17th of June 2014. So the day after the email we've just seen, you say, Dear Mr. Roper, fire testing of cladding test project update. BS8414 Part 2 fire test on the system as supplied and installed by Celotex was tested on the 2nd of May 2014. We have reviewed the data and video footage of the test and confirmed that we are in the process of issuing a test report and a classification report to BR135. Should you require any further information, please feel free to contact me. You send that to him by email at CEL 401209. If we can just go to that, please. It's at the bottom of page 1 in that email run. You can see the email at the bottom of the screen there, Mr. Howard. You say, 17th of June, how's that? That's all you say. Why were you asking Jonathan Roper whether he was satisfied with the content of the letter you were sending?
Just good client management, just to request I've done a letter of comfort. Did it meet his requirements? It's a question of, is that acceptable? Does that meet your needs for a letter of comfort?
Yes. Did you think that was an entirely appropriate thing to do, given the requirements of impartiality?
As I said, letters of comfort are pretty common, and it was just a statement saying, what's your view on this letter of comfort that we have sent out?
No, I mean, was it really appropriate, did you think, to ask him his view about whether what you had provided to him was sufficient?
Yes, I do think it's appropriate, yeah.
Now, let's see his response. At the top of the page, please, top of page 1, 17th of June, same day, he comes back to you and says, Steve, This is fine, thanks, with the exception of, to the naked eye, it's not overly clear whether we have been successful or not. I understand that for a test report to be issued, this means that we have passed, but could we be a little clearer in the holding letter? Could we amend the second paragraph to state, we have reviewed the data and video footage of the test and confirmed that we are in the process of issuing a test report and a classification document to state that the tested system has met the criteria laid out in BR 135, or something similar. And then if we look at CEL 50373, we see what happens next. This is a further copy of the further version of the 17th of June 2014 letter that you wrote to Celotex. And you can see the text in the second main paragraph. We have reviewed the data and video footage of the test and confirmed that we are in the process of issuing a test report and classification document to BR 135. The classification report will confirm the recommendations in clause 12.5 approved document B have been complied with. It's clearly not a cut and paste necessarily, but this was you amending the letter to accommodate Mr. Roper's request, wasn't it?
Yes.
Why are you letting your test sponsors suggest what to write in holding letters?
Well, because of the interaction that you have with your client base. I mean, he probably had a need for a holding letter and of a certain level of detail.
Yes, why are you letting your test sponsors, such as Celotex, take control of that level of detail and the wording to be used?
Well, I don't believe they were taking control. They can suggest wording, but ultimately, if we disagree with the wording, then we'll change it. And I think in this instance, it wasn't a cut and paste, and I'd amended it accordingly. The letter's a statement of fact. It reflected the facts at the time.
I'm not challenging that. I'm simply seeking to understand the process here. It looks as if Mr. Roper suggested, wasn't happy with your first version, suggested some wording for your second version. You took that suggestion on board and reworded the letter, not exactly with his own words, but to accommodate his request. And my question really is did you see the dangers of allowing Celotex to take a measure of control or participation, if you prefer the word, in what you were saying about their product?
No, I don't believe there's any danger because the letter is factual. It says what we did and it's a summary of that. It has just confirmed that the test report or the test has been conducted and we were in the process of issuing a test report and planning to issue a classification. There's no, I can't, it's a statement of fact.
Do you agree that this exchange shows a measure of close collaboration on the precise language of the holding letter?
I think it shows a response to a reasonable client request. I don't think there's any collaboration as such.
Good. Why is there no description of the tested system in this letter?
Because then very little, you can't, the letter's not usable other than just a confirmation that a system has been tested in it. The letter is basically unusable, beyond confirming that we tested.
Did you know what Mr. Roper wanted it for?
No.
You asked him?
No.
Why not?
Because, as I said, letters of comfort are pretty usual. We send them out, confirmation of completed tests. We do it regularly, or we used to do it regularly.
What did customers generally want to use comfort letters for?
all sorts of different reasons. There is probably a contract or contracts in place which are requiring a test and a classification to BR135, or whatever standard that we have tested to and we're in the process of testing to.
You say you used to do it. Has the BRE changed its practice?
I don't work for the BRE anymore, so I'm talking in the past tense.
Oh, I see. Right. Going back to the last answer, but one, you say there's probably a contract or contracts in place requiring a test and a classification. Was it your practice then at the time to provide comfort letters such as these, which are in quite general terms, in order to satisfy a contractor need for such a letter without a full test report?
As I said, letters of comfort across the business and were often issued.
Did you ever give any?
It was practice at the time to confirm the status of tests following the testing before issuing of the test report.
And given the variety of uses to which these comfort letters could be put, did you not think it appropriate to ask Mr. Roper on this occasion what he was going to use it for?
No, because it's just a confirmation of what's gone on. The letter in its form could not be used to put a system on a building, which is why there's no summary of materials in there. It's just a confirmation that a company has tested and we are in the process of writing a report and classification document.
But at that point, of course, the test report and the classification report had not been finalised, had they?
No.
And in fact, they weren't finalised until early September 2014, were they?
No, but that's the reason why people request letters of comfort, because of the time delay between running a test and the issuing of the test report.
At the time you wrote this comfort letter, Mr. Howard, had you reviewed all the data and fully satisfied yourself that the test data supported classification to BR135?
Yes, I would have reviewed the test data and I'd have ensured that we had run for the full duration of the test.
Right. Wasn't quite my question. You'd have reviewed the test data, seen that it had run for the full duration of the test. But my question was, had you reviewed all the data and fully satisfied yourself that the test data supported classification to BR135?
Yes, I believe I did.
Can you explain why it therefore took so long for the test report and the classification report to come out thereafter?
Because the workload, it's delays in test reports are not exclusive to cladding and they're not exclusive to BRE. There is usually months of wait, or it was my experience at the time in the department, between issuing of or completion of tests and actually issuing of test documentation, including classifications. A 3-month turnaround or a 6-month turnaround was entirely possible. There were delays post Grenfell of getting test documentation out of a year. I don't know where BRE is with that now. The delays between tests and issuing documentation is common.
We can follow the history of this through, but you'll recall that the drafts weren't issued until I think the 19th of June, and then there was a review process and discussion with the client, wasn't there, with Celotex in July, before the reports were finally issued in early August. I think I said September earlier, I meant August.
Sorry, I'm not sure what you're asking. Are you asking whether I agree with those?
What I'm putting to you is that how can you reconcile producing this document at this stage when in fact there was still a lot more work to do on the drafts, and including discussion with the clients?
because the classification is largely temperature based, and you have your other factors in there. They are quite simple to review and establish whether the parameters have been met by review of the data and footage.
Now, can we move on then to the test report itself? The test report, as it was eventually produced, was issued in the name of Phil Clark and Tony Baker. But Phil Clark told the inquiry in his oral evidence last week, and this is day 96, page 93, lines 18 to 25, that you had involvement, some involvement, in checking it while it was still in draft. Is that right?
That's correct.
Can we look at that? It's BRE 3030677. Now, this is a copy of the draft test report, which was produced on the 2nd of June 2014 by the BRE. And at the top of the page there, you can see it says 18/7/14. See that?
Yes.
And at the bottom right-hand side, it's marked version 3 for checking and signing.
Yes.
And then there's a signature or scratch underneath that, which we believe to be Phil Clark's. Can you confirm?
Yes, that looks like Phil Clark's signature.
Do you know whose handwriting it is when it says version 3 for checking and signing?
I think that's Phil's.
That's Phil's. And then it's at the top, the date, 18th of July 2014. Is that also Phil Clark's handwriting?
No, that's mine.
That's you?
Yeah.
Right. And that's in blue.
Yes.
We then go to page 6 of this document. You can see that there is handwriting on this page in various different colours and some initials. Let's just go through this. You can see that someone in blue pen has checked the components listed under paragraph 3.2 description of product. Can you see that?
Yes.
It's in blue pen. Was that you?
Yes.
That was you. And we can see that almost all of them have ticks next to them. What were you checking the components listed there against?
I can't recall, possibly photographs, drawings, any notes available?
Notes available. What sort of notes?
Well, any notes that were available in the file.
Right. And the handwriting at the top there, 2 layers, 10mm plasterboard. Is that your writing?
Yes.
And the scratch next to it, is that Phil Clark's signature?
Yes.
So just help me with the process at this point. Was the process that he had done the draft, sent it to you, you had written your annotations on it in blue biro, and then it had gone back to him for further marking, and he initialed next to where you'd written. Is that how it worked?
The process was I would just write on the various versions of the test report until all the corrections had been done and confirmed.
Yes, what I'm really seeking to understand is when you see the little signatures there, whether Phil Clark had written those next to what you had already written or ringed.
Yeah, I think when you go through a test report, you just try and highlight any issues, any questions, or any differences between what's in the test report and what's coming out of the review. And
at the bottom of that list, you can see the last bullet point says 12mm Marlier turnip decorative rain screen board. And in brackets, you've written Natura. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, I can't work it out. Is that the closed bracket or is it a question mark?
It's a question mark.
Right. Why were you the Natura?
Just to confirm whether it was Marley Eternit Natura.
Why did you want to confirm that?
It was a question asking what specific Marley Eternit board it was.
What prompted that question? Remember?
I don't. It was just, I think Marley at the time were producing various boards. So it was just a confirmation back to Phil, or a question back to Phil, what Marley Eternit Natura?
Had you seen something to raise the question?
As I said, I can't recall. As I said, there was a specific board that was commonly used in systems, and it was Marley Eternit Natura. So the question was, should that be in there, or is it a different product?
Can I just ask, Mr. Howard, do you know what Natura refers to?
It's a product name.
Yeah, but what does it signify? A composition, a colour, or what?
Composition, I believe. It's a specific type of board.
Right, thank you.
Not
very
a reference.
Can we go to BRE 3032372 at page 3? And have that blown up, please, on the screen. This is a delivery note from FGF, Birmingham. And if you look at the top right-hand corner, you can see it's dated the 14th of April 2014. At the very bottom, you can see it's signed by Phil Clark. He accepted. And you can see what's delivered under the description and unit and original quantity and quantity delivered. And you can see that it says under description, Natura, and there are some measurements, 3070 times 1250 times 8mm ruby sheet, original quantity 6, quantity delivered 6. And then underneath that, immediately underneath it, Natura N154 cream white, 3130 times 1280 times 12mm sheet, quantity 5. And then there's something called Natura Plus, also in 12mm, opal. This clearly identifies the Marley Eternit 12mm product as Natura, doesn't it? You can see.
Yes.
And it also identifies the ruby panels as Natura. My question is, had you identified the 12mm panels as Natura by reference to these delivery note, or this delivery note?
I can't recall.
Can't recall. Would you have looked at the delivery notes on the file when checking the components of the rig as you did? Would have. Can I be clear what I mean? Would it have been your practice to have done that?
I wouldn't usually go back to delivery notes, no.
You wouldn't usually?
No.
Sometimes?
Sometimes, yeah.
What would govern whether you sometimes would do that?
If there was question marks over the build or specific descriptions of products, but it wasn't my usual practice to go all the way back to the build notes, to the delivery notes.
It looks on the documents there that you would have been prompted to ask the question Natura by looking at this document forming part of the delivery notes on the file. Is that right? Is that where you would have got the Natura from?
I can't recall, but Natura is a specific type of Marley Eternit board, so it was probably to confirm what the board was on the system. It was what the annotation on the report is Natura with a question mark, i.e. what was it?
What I'm really suggesting to you is that you wrote the word Natura with the question mark next to it because you'd seen that brand name in the delivery note, rather than recalling that that was a brand name for a Marley Eternit board.
I don't recall. I mean, as I said, it's a popular board.
Looking at the delivery note, you can see, as I've shown you in the first line, that it identifies the 8mm Ruby board also as Natura, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But we don't see that you commented on the fact that only one type of Marley Eternit was identified in the list that we've just been looking at in the draft report, namely the 12mm, but not the 8mm. You don't do that, do you?
No, it's not. It's on the delivery note, but wasn't recorded in the report.
Can you explain why you didn't note the presence of the 8mm Marley Eternit Ruby on the list of components when you were reviewing it?
Because I would not have gone all the way back to the delivery notes when checking the report.
Right, that's but you said you couldn't recall whether you did or not. Is your explanation that because it's not there, therefore you didn't? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I said was it wasn't my usual practice to go all the way back to the delivery notes to check system components. I'd only go back to delivery notes if there was a real question mark that needed the information from them.
Let's go back to the draft report, please, at BRE 30677 at page 13. You can see here that you looked at this because you wrote this arrow in blue pen, didn't you? Well, let me ask you, is that yours?
Yeah, that looked like my writing.
I assumed it is because it's in the blue. And you wrote to size. What's that a reference to?
Probably to increase the size of the photograph.
Increase the size of the photograph.
In the report.
Is that not a reference to the fact that there were two sizes of Marley Eternit board shown here as the different colours?
No, I think it's probably more likely to be looking at to get the increase the size of the report. Sorry, the size of the photo. I can't recall specifically.
It doesn't say increase the size, it says to size. There's to size with a figure 2, not TO. So is this not a reference to the fact that you had noted here that there were in fact two sizes of Eternit board, one signified by the white and one signified by the clearly visible ruby bands on this photograph?
I don't recall that. I can't recall why I wrote that.
Given that you could clearly see from this photograph that there were two colours, as indeed you observed during the test, why did you not go back and check the delivery notes, if you didn't, to check what these two products were?
But there's 4 colours. There's 4 different colours. It was not unusual to have multicoloured systems installed.
Why not note the fact that there were 2 different colours in the list of components?
Well, but there's 4 different colours. If you look at that photograph, So it just looked like they'd used multicoloured boards.
Well, you say 4 different colours. I can see that the wing wall at the bottom has got a slightly darker grey panel there. Where's the 4th colour?
It might be shadow, but on the wing wall,
Right. Given that you were there at the time, you would have noticed 4 colours. I don't think you mentioned the fact that you've noticed 4 colours at the time, as opposed to shadow representing one of them. Are you going just on the photograph now, or do you have a recollection that there were in fact 4 colours at the time?
I don't really recall this specific test in that level of detail because I wasn't the project manager. What I'm trying to say is it's a multicoloured system, which I have seen that didn't strike me as anything unusual. They just used multicoloured boards. There's grey boards at the bottom on the wing.
Phil Clark's evidence, and this is both in his witness statement and to the inquiry last week, was that he had actually had a specific conversation with Mr. Roper about the ruby-coloured boards because he wanted to know about them. If it was so common to have multicoloured rigs, as you're telling us, are you able to account for why it was necessary for Mr. Clark to have that conversation?
Because certain colours and certain pigments used to dye boards have a higher organic content, so they performed differently in reaction to fire tests.
And a ruby-coloured board was one such board, yes?
I wouldn't know that without knowing what the dye was or the organic content or testing available. But colour is one of the questions that you ask.
Right. So if it's very usual to have multicoloured boards, would it be very usual to understand what each board with different colours was? Because, as you say, of different performances in fire, depending on the pigments used.
Yes, I mean, looking at this, we should have understood and fully documented what each colour was in the board, but it's a large-scale test. And in hindsight, yes, we should have detailed all the colours that were on there and what the boards were.
Yes, in hindsight, that's noted, and I'm grateful. But I just try to work out the thinking at the time. Given that you would need to understand what these boards were if they were of different colours, why didn't you go about that task when reviewing the list of components?
Because I just took it at the time that they'd supplied multicoloured boards and we were testing a multicoloured board system. I didn't see anything. It's a cladding test, it's a large-scale test. I didn't see the need to go any further with that.
Did you not see the need at least to identify clearly each separate set of boards of different colours so that somebody reading the test report would understand that there were different coloured boards on the outside, possibly with different fire performances?
I didn't at the time, no, I didn't.
Why is that?
I just think for the larger scale tests I'd accepted, or it was accepted, that the boards, it's not a small scale reaction to fire test. If you're running a cladding test, it's a large scale test. Maybe there wasn't the thought that the colour would make that much difference in a cladding test.
Did you,
the size of the test.
Did you notice the fact that these ruby boards were at very specific points, important points on the rig, namely at the level 2 thermocouples and at the top of the rig.
Did I notice specifically? Yeah, I've seen the test report. I've reviewed a draft of the test report. So I would have noticed because I went through it and my writings on.
And therefore, were you not curious to know why these multicoloured or these different coloured boards were present at those particular places on the rig?
Not specifically, no. I didn't ask a specific question because you have multicoloured, you can have multicoloured systems.
Yes. And you can have multicoloured systems, I understand that. But where the different colours appear at these two important parts of the rig, the level 2 thermocouples and the top of the rig, why didn't you specifically ask yourself, I wonder what those are?
Because I just assumed that all we had was a consistent level of board of different colours. You will often see in buildings a different colour on floor slab levels, the decorative features. So it didn't strike me that we were doing anything particularly different to what was being tested elsewhere.
Did you not wonder why those different colours weren't used anywhere else on the rig or at other locations on the rig?
No.
Did the fact that they were only at the level 2 thermocouples and the top of the rig not signify anything to you at the time?
No, not really. I think I'd accepted that we're dealing with a single layer of board and they'd chosen multicoloured boards.
Well, why wasn't the mere fact that they had chosen multicoloured boards reason enough for you to go back and find out what they were against the delivery notes on the file?
Because, as I said, the significance of the multicoloured boards in those those points was not. It was as if we were dealing with I was under the impression we were dealing with a single layer of board system with different coloured boards, and that was the configuration in which they wished to test.
Indeed. Given, I'll try one more time, and maybe you can't help any further, but given the fact that these were different coloured boards, the coloured boards can perform differently in a fire, and given the specific locations at the level 2 thermocouples and the top of the rig, why didn't you just check to make sure you understood precisely what those boards were being used at those important locations before signing off on the list of components in the test report?
Because, as I said, I didn't put enough emphasis on the colours because I was dealing with what I thought was a single layer of board on the system.
Can we look at page?
I'm wondering whether you can find a convenient point.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'm thinkingly overrun my time. I apologise.
No, I was letting you run because it was all part of a set of questions. But
As a convenient moment.
are you sure?
It's as convenient as any. Yes.
All right. Well, I think it's time we had a break, Mr. Howard. So we're going to take a break now, and we'll resume, please, at 20 to 12. And again, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it over the break. All right? Thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to continue hearing from Mr. Stephen Howard. Mr. Howard, you can hear me, I hope, and see me?
Okay.
Good. Thank you very much. And you're ready to carry on, I hope?
I am, yes.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, then, when you're ready, Mr. Millett, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Howard, did you ever have any discussions internally within the BRE about what these ruby-coloured boards were on this rig?
I can't recall.
Did Mr. Clark tell you at any point that you could ignore the different colours on the rig because they made no difference?
No.
Did Mr. Clark tell you that they made no difference because the whiteboards had been thickened from 8mm in the February 2014 test to 12mm in the May 2014 test?
No.
Can we go back to page 6 of the report, please? That's BRE 3030677 at page 6. And you say under section 3.3, just at the very bottom of the page, do you see under fire breaks, it says vertically either side of the hearth for the full height of the test frame. And those are your words you've suggested should be added in there, aren't they?
Yes.
Yes. Now, if we look at BRE 3030677, page 12, same report, page 12, we can go to figure 1, and that's the system during construction, which clearly shows this. Is this image what prompted you to make the correction or the addition?
I can't recall. I mean, it's the report's a drafting process at that stage that we're going through. I would check photographs, I would check notes, I would check a number of things.
Right. You can clearly see on this, can't you, that there are fire barriers vertically either side of the hearth for the full height of the test frame?
Yes.
Yes. Now, in her expert's report, Dr. Lane has observed, and I better show you this. This is a BLAS 5026 of page 40. BLAS 5026, page 40. This is section E4.5.21. And she says, the provision of cavity barriers is different in the photograph, figure 2 in the BRE report, which is the figure it became in the final version, relative to the design drawings, figure 7 in BRE report. Additional vertical cavity barriers were installed in the test above level 1, but not shown on the test drawings. An additional third horizontal cavity barrier installed in the test, but is not represented in the test drawings. Now, that's what she says. If we look at the copy of the report as issued, that's at BRE 402497. Can we go to that, please, at page 17? BRE 402497, page 17. This is figure 7 of the issued report that she is talking about. And if you look at it, you may need to have it blown up a bit, but you can see pretty clearly from that it doesn't show the vertical fire barriers, does it?
No.
Okay. Now, this diagram is not in the version that you reviewed, nor the inquiry believes, but we'll have to check, the version reviewed by Mr. Baker. Can you help us as to how this diagram got into the final version of the report?
I can't. No, I don't know how that went in.
Would it be normal for a diagram such as this to be inserted after checking?
No, you shouldn't do that.
Right. Can you explain how come it happened?
Well, all I've done is reviewed a draft. I have returned a draft for correction. I can't explain how an additional drawing went into a report.
Can we go back to the draft that you reviewed at BRE 3030677? And this time, let's go please to page 29. This is figure this is figure 90. When you read this report and made corrections, did you look at this photograph?
I can't recall, possibly. Is there any text either side of the photograph? Because my usual practice would be to write on the document.
Well, let's chase it through. Go back to page 26. Bear with me. If you look at the bottom of page 26, you can see figure 16, and you've written through it and put 15. So you've changed the number. So you clearly reviewed that one, didn't you?
Yep.
And then if we go to the next page, page 27, this is figure 17. There is no annotation on that page. And similarly, page 28, figure 18, and page 29, figure 19. Are you saying that the fact that there's no mark on that page mean that you simply didn't look at those pages of the report?
I might have flipped through it, but the report is still in draft stage. So with the number of corrections that were in there, including issues over the cavity barriers, it wasn't a final review of the document. So no. I can't recall whether I would have gone through and checked each individual at that stage, or we were at the stage where it was going to go back. Well, it was definitely going back around for another set of corrections, another set of reviews.
Yes, what I'm really seeking to explore with you, Mr. Howard, is the extent to which you reviewed the full report that you were reviewing. Did you see figure 19?
I can't recall.
Is there any reason why you wouldn't have seen figure 19 working on your usual practice?
No, I'd have flipped through the report. As I said, the report was going back for a considerable number of changes, and there was obviously technical details wrong. So
you say you would have flipped through the report. That's not a fair description of the diligent approach you took to this document, isn't it? You actually made corrections on it, including some technical corrections of some detail. Is it quite fair to describe your process as simply flipping through it?
What I'm saying is it was going back round for another review. I can't recall whether it got to whether I was looking at a photograph and it was right. There's so many corrections on this that we need to redo. This needs to go back round for a full review.
We can see if we read on, though, to page 33, for example, that there was a further annotation by you. Because you write on page 33, if we can just go to that, at the top of the page, not on file, with a tick at the bottom. So you clearly got past figure 19, didn't you, in your review?
Yeah.
So can we take it then that you, although you may not recall it specifically now, sitting there today, you saw figure 19 when you reviewed this report, this draft report?
Yes, I think I would have gone through the report.
When you went through the report and saw figure 19, what did you think the white board was at the top of the rig running round, and one board at the second layer thermocouples?
I don't recall, but as I said, this is a drafting process. So
Can we please have,
some of these reports go round 5 or 6 times.
yes, this was the first time I think you'd seen this, wasn't it?
Well, no, if you look on the front, it says version 3.
Well, do you remember whether this was the first time you'd seen this?
I think this was the first time I'd seen it, but it was obviously requiring a considerable volume of work.
Can we have up on the screen, please, together, place them side by side, page 27 and page 29, respectively, figure 17 and figure 19. Now, when you went through the report, making your review and corrections as you went, did you not notice that when the rig was being dismantled, on the left-hand side, when it was just post-test, still smouldering, we could see the ruby panels in place in those 2 locations on the rig. But during dismantlement, those 2 ruby-coloured locations had gone, and behind them was this white material.
If I'd have spotted that, I would have written it on the document, but at that review stage, I may not have seen it, or sorry, I may not have registered at that point. As I said, this is a draft in progress, and some of these go round the loop 5 or 6 times.
Why would you not have spotted it? After all, these photographs are simply separated in this report by only 1 page. How is it that, as going through this report as you did, you would not have realised that there was something underneath the ruby boards in those 2 locations on this rig?
Well, as I said, you go through the drafts. I think possibly that report had got to the point where there was so many corrections needed that it had to go back for review. I mean, I'd gone through the report. The process would be to review the report until you were satisfied with it. I may have just flipped through those couple of photographs because they're photographs, and gone on to check whether other material or other aspects or the way I was checking it was going from one point to the other. As I said, these reports go through the loop, go back around the loop a number of times. They do that so that to try to minimise the chances of items being missed.
We saw earlier that you were doing at this stage a careful tick check of the precise components of the rig, weren't you?
Yes, I was comparing what was in the report to the information in the file.
And clearly these photographs were in the file because they're in the report, yes?
Yeah.
So why is it that when doing your tick check review of the precise components of the rig, you didn't, when you came to these photographs, ask yourself, I wonder what that is on figure 19. Is that a component of the rig? And what is it?
Because this is to me, this was a first draft report. I've been through it once and I expected to go through it another couple of times before adding my signature.
I don't understand that. You may have expected it to go through another version or 2, but at this stage, why wasn't your review as thorough as you could have made it, so as to minimize any further work to do on it?
Because what we usually do is, well, what usually happens is report iterations go through and you keep reviewing and you keep checking the various drafts. It's an iterative process. At that stage, as I said, the reports go back and forward a number of times. The aspects of the cavity barriers should have been reflected in the drawings, and that would have been checked. But we're at a drafting stage, so they just keep going through the loop until you are satisfied. It may have been I've just not spotted it at this stage.
I feel bound to suggest to you that you did spot it at this stage as part of your careful check of the precise components of the rig and decided to ignore the presence of that white banding in figure 19.
No.
Why would you have left the investigation of what that white banding was in figure 19 to a later review process?
Because, as I said, the review process for test reports is iterative. And it may be that I'd have gone back through, maybe you would start, that was a partial check. When you get to the point of a large number of corrections, it's time for the report to go back to get it closer to what is going to be the final issue.
When you signed this draft off, at what point did you have in mind that you would actually look carefully at these photographs?
Sorry, can you say the question again? What?
This draft off, when did you think you would have a close look at these photographs?
I expected to do the final sign-off of that report.
And you did, didn't you?
No, I didn't do the final sign-off. These are draft reports that are going through the loop.
Well, let's have a look.
There's not a sign-off process for draft reports. It's just return for corrections.
So when you sent it off, expecting for there to be a further review, when did you think you would see this again?
When Phil Clark had made the changes and those changes have been cross-checked and further reviews of the document have been done.
Mr. Howard, would you agree that the whole purpose of the iterative process that you've described is that each person who plays his part in that process should identify everything that he can that may be wrong with the draft in its current state?
It is if you expect it to go to someone else. If I'm reviewing the test reports myself and I expect to sign off the final draft, it just keeps coming back to me.
Yes, but wouldn't you expect to spot all the mistakes that you can every time it comes round?
Well, you would expect, hopefully what you would do is have a test report to start with that you only check once.
Well, maybe.
What you do is you go through an iterative process, and there are times when you don't pick it up on the first check.
I quite understand that you may not pick something up on the first check, but the way you conduct the first check, surely, is that you attempt to pick up everything.
Yes, you would attempt to pick up everything.
So one might have thought that you would examine the photographs to satisfy yourself that there was nothing that required any further action. Would that not be fair?
Well, yes, I should have picked up every error in that report, but I've not done so. But as I said, it's that I was fully expecting that report to come back to me. So it was in my mind as to the report needed a lot of work at that stage.
All right, thank you very much.
Let's move on in time. Can we go please to BRE 405773, page 385. This is an email from you to Celotex, Debbie Berger and Jonathan Roper on the 17th of October 2014, so some 6 months or so after the May test. And you say, we had a conversation a while ago regarding the content of the classification reports and the level of technical detail they contain. We need to put a lot of info in, but you don't want your competitors to see it. We've come up with a way of doing it. So if this is of interest, can you remind me of what you were hoping to achieve? Sorry, it's been a while, and I will see if we can do it. Just on the, we have come up with a way of doing it. Is the reason why you need to put a lot of technical detail into reports that a BS 8414 test is a system test, and any BR 135 classification relates only to the specific system tested?
Yes.
And therefore, anyone relying on a BR 135 classification needs to know exactly what the system tested was. Yes?
That's correct.
So, what information, if any, were you suggesting might be legitimately omitted?
Right. Well, I did provide separate evidence of this with how we were going to address this issue, because as I gave in evidence yesterday, it's not unusual for manufacturers to request that specific proprietary information is not detailed in the reports. And as I explained yesterday, across the reaction to fire testing, it's pretty commonplace to do that. The way we were going to do it is issue a full report and issue a second document that makes it very clear that there is a full report available for whoever is reliant on that and the BR 135 to install on the buildings, that was available. And I have submitted evidence and examples of how that was going about. It actually gets us over this issue of removing specific lines or specific technical details from the report.
You started that answer with something that neither I nor the transcriber could hear, but you said inaudible, something, bored, in answer to my question. What was your answer? My question was, what information, if any, were you suggesting might be legitimately omitted? And I heard you say something, bored. Could you just tell us what you said?
I didn't say bored. I'd said manufacturers often request that proprietary information is withheld from the reports. So,
right. Well, what information?
Sorry?
That's right. Yeah, I interrupted you.
And I've provided examples in my evidence of a way to achieve that. And it gets us away from this business of removing specific details in the report at their request, which is common in reaction to fire test and classification reports.
What specific information were you advocating be removed from or not mentioned in the report?
Well, that would have come down to the request of Celotex or whoever we were going to do it for, but it would involve issuing a full report with all the details and a second document called a supplementary report that makes it very clear that specific details have been removed, but there is an original report available for review.
Yes, and as you say, you deal with this in your statement, I think. Should we go to that? It's paragraph 188 in your statement. And it's on page 42. Is this what you were referring to when you said earlier that you'd given evidence about that?
Yes.
And in the last part of that paragraph, it says a proposal was made that BRE might be able to issue supplemental reports showing less detail than the main report, which could then in theory be put into the public domain, although the supplemental report would make it very clear that full test and build details were available in the main report. So is this right, that your way of doing it, referred to in the emails, was to come up with this sort of supplemental, truncated version of the report, which could be put into the public domain, which then signposted the availability of the main report? Was that the plan? Or was that
was what was being suggested, and I believe I provided examples of where we've done that for others.
I see. And that's what you're referring to, or that's what she is referring to, is it, in her email?
That's what I understood, because the proprietary information in the reports is valuable. And as I said, it's not uncommon to have those requests. What you end up doing with reaction to fire reports is just basically saying the manufacturer or test sponsor requested this information is withdrawn, and it's this, in my view at the time, was a better way of doing it.
Can we go to CEL 402131, please? This is an internal email within Celotex in October 2014, where Debbie Berger writes to Jonathan Room and Paul Evans, and also John Roper copied, saying, I'm going to set up a meeting with Steve Howard early next week to talk about how to detail our BRE RS 5000 fire report, so as it gives the relevant commercial info without the sensitive stuff. We've got some ideas that could help us. Would you like to come to this meeting? I would value your input. If so, will you give me access to your diary so I can schedule a meeting? Is that a reference to your email of the 17th of October, where you told her that you'd come up with a way of doing it?
Yes, I believe so.
Yes. Now, we know that you did meet Debbie Berger on the 4th of November 2014, and we have a note of that meeting. And before I take you to that, can I just ask you, what was, to the best of your understanding, I know this isn't your language, what was the sensitive stuff that she didn't want to have in the report?
I don't know, but from experience, information such as position of cavity barriers, number of cavity barriers, manufacture of cavity barriers, and things of that nature were considered sensitive in that sector. So it wasn't unusual, as I said, and other areas of testing, it's not unusual for test sponsors to remove details of proprietary, or request the removal of details of proprietary information.
Was this not always a problem with any 8414 test, given that it's a system test? You're going to be testing a product within a system comprising components which are proprietary.
It's only, well, it is a problem, but it's a problem if the test sponsor, if the security of the test report becomes an issue for the test sponsor. If they cannot rely on that being held in confidence to the people that they are supplying to, then it becomes an issue. But from a technical point of view, you want to put as much information in the test report as you can.
Yes, I was just wondering why it was that it took until late 2014 to come up with this double report solution. Wasn't it a much more common problem before that?
Well, the approach before that, and it's across RTF reports, is to remove the information on request and basically put a statement in that says held on file, which it was the approach that we then come up with was to issue two reports, one with all the technical detail and one effectively unusable, but demonstrated that the test was in existence.
Yes, and given that you'd had to come up with a way of doing it, it looks very much like this was the first time that you had encountered this problem. Is that right?
On cladding, yes, but there's a set of procedures under the e-golf rules that we were using in other areas. So this was you applying those rules to this area.
Can you account for why this was the first time this had come up on cladding, as you put it?
Well, it wasn't the first time, because in the original Kingspan report, the 2005 one, there are sections in there that says products are held on file. And as I said, it's across the reaction to fire business.
Forgive me, Mr. Howard, your answer was, in answer to my question, it looks as if this was the first time you'd encountered this problem. You said on cladding, yes. That's what you'd said. That's your evidence? Do you want to change that?
Well, it's the first time I'd had to deal with it and come up with a solution that didn't give us this issue of putting the details are held on file.
Can we then go to the note of the meeting? CEL 401260. This is Debbie Berger's note of that meeting. And you can see the date of it. It's well, you can't see it from the document, but it was the 4th of November 2014. Let's look at the bullet points. At the top of the page, market, it says, growing uncertainty, technical application, first bullet point, emotional, and then underneath that, life safety. Is it right that the BRE recognised that life safety was a consideration?
Well, life safety is a consideration in fires, but I wasn't aware of these notes.
Do you remember what she said, or anybody said at the meeting, which might have led her to write the word emotional there?
No.
Looking further down the bullet points, you can see that there's reference to the BRE, BBA, NHBC approvals sensitive to insulation being about sales. And then underneath that, the last bullet point, burnt by K15 approvals in the past. What was that about?
I don't know. I don't remember this conversation. And these were not a set of minutes that I've seen.
Was the suggestion being made here that the BRE in the past had been too sympathetic to manufacturers? Is that the point that was being got at here by those at the meeting?
But as I said, I don't recall any of these areas being specifically discussed, and I can't really comment on what was meant by that statement.
If you go down the page to items 2 and 5, item 2 says, gain advice from a facade engineer, Andrew Jones, Total Facade Solutions, to direct us. And then under 5, bring together Stephen Howard from BRE and Andrew Howard, Total Facade Solutions, to better understand how to move forward with testing, explore. Was it you who recommended Andrew Jones, Total Facade?
No.
Do you know how his name came up?
I don't believe I know Andrew Jones.
If this note is accurate, can you explain why you or the BRE would be involved in helping Celotex to, quote, better understand how to move forward with testing?
Sorry, where are we looking?
Bullet point 5.
Sorry.
Bring together Stephen Howard from BRE and Andrew Jones, I should say, I think, Total Facade Solutions, to better understand how to move forward with testing. My question is, why were you involved? Could BRE be involved in helping Celotex to better understand how to move forward with testing?
Because it would be back to this issue of if they wanted to cover a range of products, setting up the test plans and test programs to test the most onerous configurations. That is something that's common across the business.
Was it common across the business that you would work together with facade engineers such as Andrew Jones from Facade Solutions in designing or setting up test plans and test programs?
Well, we don't design. I wouldn't 100% know who I was talking to, but the information that we would provide back as the approach to take in terms of thickest and thinnest insulation and things of that nature. If a client brings in someone else and we would talk to them as well along the same lines.
Would it be common that you would work together with a facade professional in use your words and not my words, setting up the test plans and test programs?
Well, I can only think, yes, potentially. It wouldn't be common, but we would do it. There's nothing to prevent us talking to a facade company along those lines, providing we had the permission from Celotex to do so.
And then you can see what would be explored in those two sub-bullet points under paragraph 5, indicative tests on A2 and Class 0 cladding panels, and consider designs for retesting. So it looks as if, according to this note of this meeting, there was discussion about the BRE being involved with Mr. Jones of Total Facade Solutions in consideration of designs for retesting.
Again, the scope of that would be identifying testing configurations that could be taken forward to assess.
Do you agree that there was discussion about that at this meeting? As far as
I really don't recall that meeting, and I'm a bit surprised at that level of detail.
Right. Under item 2, just looking back a little bit up the screen, please. It says in the bullet points under that, SFS and brick facade testing, consider test as part of BS 8414 Part 2, as instructed by Steve Howard. What does as instructed by Steve Howard mean, do you think?
I don't know. I don't recall the meeting, and
Right.
I don't recall because it would be very, very unusual to test a brick facade. So I'm pretty sure I'd have remembered that, because you wouldn't usually test those sort of systems.
Were you advising Celotex on possible systems to test in order to widen the scope of RS 5000's application?
I don't believe we ever got to that point with them.
Right. You may never have got to that point, but you were looking at preparatory steps to do so, were you?
We would offer the same service to Celotex, or we would offer the same approach of testing so we could feed into assessment reports. There's no reason not to.
And how did that sit with your obligations to remain impartial, did you think?
As I said, we're not detailing how clients should test. We're telling them the parameters which they should test in the worst case scenarios, so that we can assess on for that. As I said, it's common throughout the fire testing area to provide this sort of information.
It looks from this note that there was no discussion at this meeting about coming up with the solution you'd come up with, about by which you would have a supplemental report and a main report. That doesn't appear to have been discussed at this meeting looking at the note. Can you explain why that was?
No, it was just an offer had been made and they decided not to proceed with it.
Can we go to CEL 401261, please? This is an email sent by Jonathan Room of Celotex to Andrew Jones of Total Facades on the 14th of November 2014. And he says, "Hi Andy, reason for me trying to get hold of you over the last couple of days is twofold. One, I met with Steve Howard from the BRE last Tuesday to discuss the option of further testing of our RS 5000 product for BSA 414 and choice of materials. And then he says, one thing that Steve mentioned was he would like to understand better the decision-making process for designing a facade system. He's privy to manufacturers' tests at the BRE, but would like clarification from the other side of the fence. Would you be interested in arranging to speak with Steve? This would certainly help with our future discussions when deciding what we should test." Is Mr. Room's record of what you said there in the second paragraph correct?
Yes, and that was a response that was given. I would like to better understand the decision-making process, i.e. what the variables were for a facade system. And yes, I was privy to manufacturers' tests, as were all the test staff.
Why were you interested in gaining such an understanding?
So that, in essence, we could understand the parameters that they wish to test to, which we wish that we could test, and then move forward with assessment. Unless you have a full understanding, you can't set your test systems up.
What's the other side of it? What did you understand? And help us, was meant by the other side of the fence. I know you didn't write this email, but what was the other side of the fence that you were seeking to understand? The text is correct, as you confirmed.
Well, I don't know what side of the fence is being referred to. I was there providing, or we were there providing a testing service for manufacturers, and not sure I can add to what was meant by other side of the fence.
I want to ask you finally about Class 0 and your involvement in issuing the Class 0 classification for RS 5000. Now, do you recall that in fact, historically, Celotex had tested FR 5000, which was the same product with a different brand name, to BS 476 Part 6 and Part 7 in November 2011 and achieved National Class 0?
I wouldn't, yes, I'm aware of it, but I wouldn't remember it specifically. So
we have two documents, and you accept from that you were signatories to the classification. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. And just for the record, it's CEL 50382 and 383. Let's go to CEL 401210, please, page 2. And if we go to page 2 in that email run, we see an email sent at 10:19 in the middle of the screen there from Jonathan Roper to you, copy to Phil Clark. Do you see that? And he asks you in the second paragraph, can you also please arrange that our current Class 0 test report concerning our FR 5000 product can be renamed and reissued with Celotex RS 5000 as the product code? This is 12th of June 2014. Did you have any concerns at the time about the BRE reissuing this classification for a product without carrying out any additional testing?
No, because there's procedures in place to deal with that are followed. And the reissued classification documents made it perfectly clear that no technical assessment had been conducted and the manufacturer declared all they were doing is changing the name.
Now, final topic. I just want to ask you about Phil Clark's visit to the BRE in preparation to give his witness statement, to make his witness statement. We heard from him, and indeed following a letter from the BRE solicitors on the 24th of February 2021, last week, that Mr. Clark attended the BRE site for a period of 3 days, unaccompanied by any legal representative, before he prepared his witness statement for the inquiry. And it was his evidence when he was asked that he'd been given access to any BRE files or documents that he deemed relevant. My question for you, Mr. Howard, is were you aware that he had made that visit?
Yes.
Did you see him during that visit?
I believe so, briefly.
How briefly?
I knew he was on site. I can't recall exactly how much time we spent together, but I would have said hello, I believe.
Can you remember what you discussed?
I don't believe we discussed anything.
Right. He told us, as I say, that he'd been given access to any BRE files or documents that he wanted to see. Did you assist him in that exercise?
Not directly. That was undertaken by Angela Richards.
Did you assist indirectly in that exercise?
Potentially, because we secured all the files in one area. So any access to the files, I may have been asked what cupboard they were in, what drawer they were in, where on the V drive, where on the X drives. But my involvement in it was no more.
Did he ask directly or indirectly for the full test file?
I can't remember producing the full test file for him, but that would have been, he would have had available to him the records that we had on site, including electronic versions.
Did he mention to you directly or indirectly through Angela Richards that he thought there were documents missing from the test file?
No.
Or documents missing generally?
No.
Did he ask you directly or indirectly for any specific documents?
I don't believe so. I don't exactly recall. As I said, Angela Richards was dealing with it first hand. I wasn't.
Did you discuss Mr. Clark's attendance at the BRE site in order to have access to documents with Dr. Debbie Smith at all, either at that time or later?
I would have been involved in the process, yeah.
Could you tell us what you did by way of involvement in the process?
Well, it would have been, as I said, we collated all the records and Debbie Smith had a PA as well. It would have been facilitating, letting people know where certain files were, with certain things, just explaining the filing system, the mix between files and electronic records.
When you were collating all the records, or when you were involved in the collation of all the records, did you notice that the test file for the May Celotex test was incomplete in any way?
No.
Did you examine any of the records that you thought might be relevant for the purposes of the inquiry to ensure that they were complete?
Well, I examined the file to produce evidence. I don't think I would have gone through a process of checking the files to see that they were complete.
Did anybody do that?
No, I can't recall, not that I'm aware.
Did nobody at the BRE go through the BRE's records to make sure that what the BRE was advised was relevant for the purposes of the inquiry was complete?
Well, you have access to records and they were the ones that were there. Any records that we have were provided. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Whose decision was it, do you know, to allow Mr. Clark unsupervised access to the BRE's documents and data over the course of 3 days?
Well, it would have sat with Debbie Smith.
Did you discuss that question with Debbie Smith?
No.
Do you know, can you tell us how it was that Debbie Smith came to her decision that Mr. Clark should be afforded a 3-day unsupervised access to the BRE's documents?
Because the request for evidence, and it was the same with Dave Hoare and Richard Jones, it was a case of providing access to the records so they could produce their witness statements. The treatment of Phil Clark was no different to Richard Jones or Dave Hoare.
I see. So were they also given unsupervised access?
I don't know.
So my question just...
I knew they were on site. As I said, the level of supervision was with Angela Richards.
Right. And what was her role, Angela Richards?
I think her role at the time was customer service manager.
Right.
But just all the evidence from people that had left was given at the BRE site.
Right. So just to be very clear, who made the ultimate decision that Mr. Clark should be given unsupervised access to the BRE's documents over that 3-day period?
Well, I think that's something I did not make that decision. That sits at a level above me. So, well, I believe it was Debbie Smith, but that I don't recall directly.
Yes, thank you very much. Now, Mr. Chairman, I've come to the end of my prepared questions. There may be one or two further questions in my note. Just go back and review, and there may well be questions from others that I need to put. So is that a convenient moment for the usual break?
It is, certainly. Well, now, Mr. Hyde, just so that you understand how things go from here, Mr. Millett thinks he's covered the full ground that he needs to cover, but he needs a couple of minutes just to check that. And there are others who are following this hearing who also may wish to suggest questions that should be put to you. So we have a break at this stage just to give them that opportunity. I'm going to say that we'll come back at 1:45, please. And at that stage, we will know whether there are any more questions that we need to ask you. All right? And no talking about your evidence while we're on the break. Very good. All right, 1:45, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. We're now going to see whether Mr. Millett has any further questions for Mr. Howard. Just check that Mr. Howard's there. I think he is. Are you, Mr. Howard?
Yes, I am.
Good. Thank you very much. Well, we'll see now whether there are any more questions for you. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Thank you very much. Just two questions, really. The first is in relation to the enlargement of the photograph in the draft report that you reviewed. Can I just have two documents up side by side on the screen? The first is from the draft report that we looked at earlier. That's BRE 3030677 at page 13. And the second, at the same time, please, is BRE 402497, also page 13. And I wanted to show you these because, in fairness to you, because when I asked you about two size, you said it was about enlargement. And on the left-hand side, we could see the draft with your annotation on it. And on the right-hand side, we could see what has become figure 3 in the report as issue, which has indeed been enlarged. Now, when you wrote two size, were you intending that it should be enlarged as we see? Or were you just remembering that it had been enlarged and were ex post facto rationalizing why you had written two size?
I hadn't remembered specifically that the request had gone in to enlarge the photo, but that is typical of my style.
Right. Can I then show you CEL 50742, please? And ask you to go within that email run to page 5. This is an email. I'm afraid it starts at the foot of page 4. And it's an email from Jonathan Roper. We go to the foot of page 4 on the 8th of November 2013. If we go to the top of page 5, you can see it's to Luke Cresswell and John Simmons there at Simco. And he says, as discussed, I'm awaiting the BRE to send generic rig details over to help you with design process. Steve at BRE thought a visit to the rig once the initial design is done would be beneficial, etc. And then he says, also, as discussed, the BRE are not willing to accept two variations of panels. The critical point of the test can only be occupied by one panel. And unfortunately, using Renault bond on the return wing isn't possible. As much as they limit the scope of the tested system, they do accept that although one system is tested, i.e. Eternit, they understand that commonly this allows insulation products to be used with a variety of systems in practice. I think testing with an Eternit panel is the route to go, but shouldn't cause us any issues with regards to using CX at Celotex behind Renault bond on the up-and-coming job. I've also got LABC involved to issue a report stating CX can be used behind a variety of systems above 18 meters to prevent any challenge for building control. Now, just at the beginning of that paragraph, Mr. Roper, it appears to be reflecting a discussion he'd had with the BRE about the BRE's unwillingness to accept two variations of panels. Do you recall yourself having a discussion with Jonathan Roper at or around this time, November 2013, in which you said that the BRE would not accept two variations of panels?
No, I don't remember the discussion.
Was it in fact the BRE's practice not to accept two variations of panels?
You would accept variability in the panels, but not for assessment purposes. If they come up with a design which involved multiple colours or multiple panel configurations for a specific building or a test, then I can't see how you could say no to that. But what you wouldn't be able to do is test multiple types of panel on a system and then do any assessment work or extrapolation work from that.
That being so, can you explain how it became common, or was common by May, to have multicoloured rigs?
I just said it was acceptable to have multicoloured rigs if that was specified. We wouldn't accept multicoloured rigs or different materials on the rigs, so an ACM and an alternate, because we would accept that if they specified it, but prevent any further work being done on the rigs in terms of use of that data going forward.
Did you see anything when reviewing the draft report for the May test that showed you that there was any specification for multi-coloured rig or multi-materials?
Sorry, did I?
Did you see anything when you reviewed the draft report that showed you that there had been any specification which would explain the multicoloured rig?
No.
No. And therefore, given that there was no specification about what the multicolours would be, why did you not investigate it?
Sorry, what? I'm not sure I quite understand.
Mr. Millett, I think there may be some misunderstanding here. There may be a distinction between multi-colours of the same material and varieties of different materials. Can we make it clear which one we're talking about, please?
Well, I'm just doing my best I can on the answer. Let's go back to your answer. You say, and this is at page 86 of the transcript a moment ago, you wouldn't accept multicoloured rigs or multi-different materials on rigs. So an ACM and an alternate, because we would accept that if they specified it. I thought you were saying to us that you would accept different coloured panels on a rig if it was specified.
Yes, if we were asked the question whether we could use a test report for future assessment work, and they decided to mix materials, then we would say we would limit. We would say we can't do that. They can still test in that configuration. They can test, as I said, it's their sample to test. But as I said, if they provided multicoloured panels, then, and that is what they wanted to test, then we would do so. It only becomes an issue if they wish to use the data that they get for other purposes or other systems, because you've got different materials and different interactions.
I see. So just so that I'm clear, are you saying that you wouldn't expect there to be a specification for different colours of panels on a rig when testing it?
There'll be a design drawing, or there'll be, what they were asking is, what are the practical limitations of mixing materials on a rig? So if you put an ACM and a cement or particle board on there, you've got differential materials. Now, they're quite within their rights to test that, but from that, we'd probably go, no, we can't do anything with that data because you've got mixed materials. But within their rights to test whatever they wish.
Mr. Millett, can I just clarify my own understanding of what I think Mr. Howard is saying? Mr. Howard, if I understand you correctly, you're saying this: if the client wants you to test a rig which has different types of materials, let's say Eternit panels and ACM panels, you would do the test, but you could not do a BR135 assessment because of the difference in materials. Is that right? First point.
No, we could classify it. What we couldn't use it for, or it would be extremely difficult to use it for, is for assessments.
You mean desktops?
desktops.
Ah, I see. All right.
Because you've got variable materials on a single rig, and things become unpredictable.
Now, the second situation I just want to ask you about is where you have different colours of the same material. Let's say ACM panels of a variety of different colours. Would that how would that affect things?
I would have to review that, but ACM, we'd have to know what the colouring process was, whether it was an anodising or whether it was a surface finish, because then you'd have a look at the respective performance of the colours, but from a small scale reaction 5 point of view. Without knowing what the process is for an ACM and the end finish, I can't really answer that. It's quite a technical question.
Well, that may be a bad choice of example. What about Marley Eternit, different colours, different coloured panels?
Would we permit that?
Yeah.
Yes.
And would that impose any restrictions on either classification or subsequent use for assessment?
It would prevent. I don't believe it would restrict the classification at all, because you would issue a classification on what you tested. We would then have to look at what the various colours were and what additional data we would need to carry that forward. But it's a technical question that we would need to address on a per contract basis.
Right. Thank you very much. Well, Mr. Millett, I'm sorry to interrupt your flow, but I just wanted to get that a bit clearer.
I think that's a bit clearer, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I do have one more question, and it's this. Given the difficulty that you've just described, difficulty is the right word, in doing desktop assessments on, or as a result of using tests where the rig was comprised of multiple colours or types of panel that you just explained to us, was that not a very good reason to be meticulous about precisely what those panels were in their various types or colours when listing the components of the test rig in the test report?
Yes, in hindsight, yes, to make that usable for assessment purposes, then you would need a lot more information. But on the day, we were not looking to do any assessment work. We were testing a system for Celtics. So there would be more questions asked if we went down that road in terms of, have you considered the various colours? Can we use this colour throughout the rig?
And was the danger in extrapolating in assessment reports based on multiform or multicoloured rigs not itself a warning light to you to make sure that what you listed in the test report was complete and accurate, and didn't simply ignore the fact that there were different colours of panel on the rig?
But as I said, we should have listed accurately, but the system as tested met the BR135 criteria. So that is what your BR test report would report on, and that is what your BR135 would state. Your classification is for the rig as shown. It's not a classification and a statement that you can then use the data to carry on.
Well, Mr. Howard, in that answer, you just said, well, the test would meet the 135 criteria. My question, I'll put it one more time, is, given the dangers of extrapolating by means of a desktop assessment from multicoloured rigs, or rigs made of panels from different forms, was it not vitally important to you to make sure that the list of components of the rig as tested identified precisely what each of those separate colours or components were?
Yes, I think I've actually stated we should have listed all the panels and the colours. But as I said, the test report and the classification report covers a specific configuration.
Mr. Howard, thank you very much. I've got no further questions for you, and I've in fact come to the end of my questions completely. It just remains for me to express my gratitude to you for coming to the inquiry and our investigations. It's been very helpful, and we're very grateful to you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Howard is also right that I should thank you on behalf of the panel for the time you've given us to give us your evidence. It has, as Mr. said, been very useful to hear what you could tell us, and we're very grateful for your coming to do so. So thank you very much indeed. And that's all the questions we have, and you're now free to go about your business in the ordinary way. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that's a convenient point. We'll resume at 2 o'clock then, please. Thank you.